Hi there, welcome back to Pretty Much Flawless. Today in this video, we are going to be building an electronics lab for under $500. Let's get into it. So, when setting up an electronics lab, first thing you need to consider is a location. So, a basement is a pretty good spot normally. I have my electronics lab in a basement. And in that location, you want three things. First of all, good lighting. This is very good lighting. This is very well illuminated. Second of all, it'd be nice to have a 120 volt 15 amp receptacle, and this must be grounded just in case if something were to go wrong on your test bench. You want to make sure it goes through the ground wire back to ground, not through you. So you want a 120 volt receptacle, just a standard household one. Make sure it's grounded. And another thing is you want a nice sturdy table, because with all the weight of your test equipment and tools and everything, it will add up. So you want a nice sturdy table. Now with that out of the way, let's start adding stuff. So the first thing is a power bar. This is actually fairly important, so if anything goes wrong on your test bench, you can quickly shut off everything on your test bench. And another thing is, if you're getting up to go somewhere, you can hit the off and just shut off everything on your test bench, so you don't have to worry too much about electrical fires, just so everything's shut off and you know everything's shut off. So that's the first thing we'll want on our bench. So the next thing you want is a multimeter. A multimeter is very useful for measuring voltage, resistance, and current, and this will also measure transistors and capacitance. So what to look for in a multimeter is typically you'll want one that will measure up to 10 amps of current. Typically that'd be a separate jack, and if it can measure transistors or capacitance, that's an added bonus. But typically one that can just measure voltage, resistance, and current. That'd be good. So the next thing we're going to talk about is a soldering iron. This is a MeFix 8898 soldering station. This is what I use. I really like it. It isn't really the highest quality thing. There's definitely ones that are of higher quality, but it works pretty good for what I do with the temperature controlled soldering iron and the hot air gun for desoldering surface mount components. But something a bit more budget friendly, if you're just starting out, would be a 30-watt soldering iron with a fine tip. And that's what I used before I got the soldering station, and it works great. I guess one thing, it's not temperature controlled, so it'll just get hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It doesn't really stay at a constant temperature, but this works good. So temperature controlled is preferred, but whatever works. So the next thing you'll need is soldering and desoldering tools after getting a soldering iron. So this is rosin core solder. This is 60% tin, 40% lead. That's the solder I used. You can also get the lead-free variety, but this is typically very good stuff to work with. It melts at a lower temperature than the lead-free stuff. And if you're worried when you're soldering that you breathe in lead fumes, you won't actually be breathing in lead fumes. Lead melts at a much higher temperature than what you'll be soldering with. But what you will be breathing in with the as you solder is rosin fumes, which probably isn't very good for you. So what I use is a fan, typically that will blow air across my workbench and just keep the solder fumes out of my face. So there's also some do-it-yourself projects on the internet on how to make a fume extractor, but that works for me. You can also get the lead-free stuff if you're more comfortable with that. It just melts at a higher temperature, and it makes it a little bit harder to work with because you have to wait till your soldering iron gets a little bit hotter. But that's okay. The next thing is solder wick. This is a desoldering tool, and you can kind of see it's some copper braids. And what you do is you put your soldering iron on this, and you put it on some solder, and what will happen is the solder will go into the copper and clean up whatever you're wicking, basically. So a solder wick. You want a sponge. This is to clean up the tip of your iron. So you want to get this kind of damp, and you want to have it to wipe your iron's tip off of. So that can go over here on the soldering iron holder. Another thing is, this is for soldering and desoldering. This is some helping hands to help you grab onto your circuit board. Have you ever found yourself in a cornfield and said to yourself, man, I need to order some PCBs? I haven't found myself in that situation yet, but if I did, I'd use this video sponsor, PCBWay. They make custom PCBs for your projects. Design and upload your Gerber files on their website, wait a few days for your PCBs to come. And that's not all they do. They also do CNC machining, 3D printing, sheet metal fabrication, and injection molding. Check out their website. There'll be a link to that in the description down below. And if you're looking to make your own PCBs, I'd really recommend using PCBWay and look forward to using them again in the future. Alright, let's get back to the video. And solder or desolder it. And another thing is, this is a desoldering pump. So basically what that is there's a plunger in here. When we push this in, the plunger comes down here, and what you'll do is you'll get your soldering iron, my finger represents the soldering iron, and warm up your joint. And then as soon as it's warm enough, you bring your desoldering pump close, the nozzle here, and you hit this button here, and that moves the plunger up here, and that will suck up the solder. So those are some very nice things to have when doing soldering and desoldering. So the next thing is an oscilloscope. You might be thinking to yourself, do I really need an oscilloscope in my electronics lab? Well, yes, it's a very, very useful tool for diagnosing and just simply learning about electronics. So you can probe around and just see how a circuit works, stuff like that. So, oscilloscope is a very useful tool, but a problem is they're expensive. So, a few ways to get around the new oscilloscope prices are to, first of all, get a used instrument. Like this one here, I got it for $120 used, and it came with the probes. It's 100 megahertz 2-channel, which is very reasonable for this instrument here. Another option is getting a pocket or handheld oscilloscope, where basically they will be kind of a digital oscilloscope. Some are do-it-yourself kits where you solder them, and you can just look at some signals. You could do that. I think it'd be better to get an instrument like this, especially if they're fairly reasonable price, but whatever works for you. So, when buying a used oscilloscope, here's a few things to keep in mind. First of all is the bandwidth. 100 megahertz is ideal. Anything lower than 100 megahertz, if the price is right, that's worth your consideration, but 100 megahertz or higher is ideal. Next thing is how many channels. 2 channels is also ideal. 4 channels is even better. You want to make sure that the channels work. So if you buy a 4-channel oscilloscope, but 1 channel doesn't work, then you only have a 3-channel oscilloscope. So you want to make sure you test each channel before putting your money down. Another thing is the oscilloscope probes. If you can find one that comes with the probes, that's very good, because probes are about $20 each. So another thing to look out for is the brand. Tektronix is the best brand for oscilloscopes. Whatever works. If you can find a good working 2-channel or more 100 megahertz or more instrument for around $100, I'd say it's a very good deal for getting a oscilloscope. So in your electronics lab, you want to have some components you can play with. So you can typically find a good kit online that will have resistors, LEDs, capacitors, transistors, diodes, and all sorts of good stuff for you to play with. Another thing is, if you can find a breadboard with some jumper wires, it'd be very good for wiring up your circuits. And another thing is, if you can find some used components like this. We got this whole stash of components for $50. Quite surprising. Somebody was clearing out the day at the state, and yeah, came with all these boxes and components in them. Capacitors, inductors, resistors, transistors, diodes, switches, all sorts of very, very neat stuff. So, you'd be amazed what you can find on the used market. So, to test all your electronic components, you want a component tester. And this is a MK328 transistor, inductor, capacitor, resistor, and ESR tester. I've had good luck using this one right here. I really like using it. This is more optional. I guess if you're doing some more repair work, this would be kind of nice to measure the ESR of your capacitors and stuff like that. Just test transistors. More for repair work, but I like using this, so works good for me. So I'd recommend getting a component tester, but that's just more optional than some other things. So, next thing you need is a power supply to power your projects. This one right here do 0 to 30 volts, and it has a 1 amp breaker on the back, but it does not do current limiting, apart from the breaker at the back. The newer power supplies nowadays have current limiting, which is very, very nice, so you only can allow a certain amount of current to flow through your circuit. Very, very useful. So, when looking for a power supply, 0 to 30 volts is great, and 5 amps is good, 10 amps is even better, and if it has current limiting, that's amazing. So the next thing is some hand tools. Really nice if you can have some wire strippers and some picks, scissors, diagonal cutters, also known as wire cutters, pliers, and some screwdrivers for taking apart things are very, very useful for hand tools. And if you can find an organizer to hold all your tools, that keeps everything nice and tidy. So here we are, the setup electronics lab. You should be able to do lots of good projects with all this. So, if you can think of anything else a beginner's electronics lab should have, let me know in the comment section down below. If you think there's anything else that electronics lab doesn't need for a beginner, let me know too. Thanks for watching this video today. Hope you learned something. If you did, please subscribe. That would really help my channel. And I'll see you next time.